Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this bright and sunny Wednesday afternoon. For those that are joining us for the first time, you are so welcome. Good for you for tuning into your wellness and learning how to enhance your well-being overall. And for those that have attended before, our wellness watchers, also good for you for being up to date on your wellness and ensuring you are taking care of yourself through and through. My name is Cassandra Francis, and I am the founder as well as a clinic director and one of the registered psychotherapists at One Piece Therapy. And today we have the lovely Taiwo Ayinde, who will be presenting on redefining resilience and giving yourself the grace you give others. I'm sure already, for those that have clicked to join or clicked to watch, this already resonates with you. So we're very excited to speak to you more about it. In particular, Taiwo, I'm sure, is eager to share her knowledge with you all. For those attending live, when a question appears for you or a comment, or maybe Taiwo even initiates a question, please feel free to either unmute yourself or use the chat function to respond. And for those watching the recorded version, please feel free to leave your question and comments in the comment section and we will answer you directly. But without further ado, I will pass it to you, Taiwo.
Welcome to the webinar for today. My name is Taiwo, and I'm one of the associate therapists here at One Piece Therapy, and also a registered psychotherapist qualifying. And today's topic, a wellness webinar, is just really talking about redefining resilience, giving yourself the grace you give others. So I was just saying that I'm hoping that we can learn one or two things as we journey together through this webinar, because this is, I believe, is one of an important topic that might help us, allow us to give ourselves the room to rest and also support and give ourselves that self-compassion. And I have lovely Cassandra that would help me move through the slides as we're going through. Awesome. So for today, I'm hoping to walk everyone along a journey where we can give ourselves an understanding of what, first of all, what is resilience, what it means, and the message that we might have heard or learned about being strong. And then we're going to explore the pressure to be strong and how strength can sometimes, become very overwhelming, and how we can feel ourselves and wanting to prove. And as we move through that journey, we would explore what it looks like in the inner critic and the self-worth, particularly how some of these expectations that we've carried over time can start to speak for ourselves. And I'll walk you through what we call the self-compassion. And I think this will be the key of our discussion, is giving ourselves the grace we give others. But most importantly, I'm hoping to walk you through some practical ways in how we can start to redefine that strength so that we can start using that in our own life. And finally, we'll just share some reflections and do a brief key takeaways from what we've learned for today. So I want to invite everyone to work along this journey as something that you can pull out strength from, but also take away practical tools that you need. Thank you. So when we look at what resilience is, I think that's a word that might mean something different for people. And this is where I would want to briefly engage one or two people. If you can put in the chat box, what are some stories and messages about strength or perseverance that you've heard growing up? If it's just one word, what kind of messages have you heard growing up? Has there been any specific statements or words that you've heard? Give yourself that memory lane. What was it like in my childhood? What messages did I hear about strength in our community? And while I am waiting for one or two, just for the next, I'll probably just say for the next 1-2 minutes, I can definitely also share my own words that I've heard. So resilience is a very big word. We've always had to keep going despite living in an environment that has a lot of struggles going up. And sometimes, we always hear these words like, we're all in it together, just keep going, don't worry, we're going to get there. It's almost like this reinforcing statements that we're hearing oftentimes. So if you have one or two things that you've heard, I'll really encourage that you put that in the chat box and I'll pick on that. But I can go to the next slide while I have you reflect on that statement and that question. Keep managing. Yeah.
And the chat mentioned keep managing. I know I was reflecting too. So I'm Jamaican, and I'm sure not even the Jamaican culture, in our culture, something I realize that's common is, it takes a community, right? To raise a child, it takes a community to raise ourselves. It takes a community to accomplish goals. And even as you are accomplishing goals, make sure that, you give back. And they share, you have to give back. You can't leave anyone behind, and things of that nature. But ultimately, that is the strength part of the strength that was embedded in me is really about how much it takes. And it's not just always the inner, but the external environment.
Yes. And I'm really glad that you shared your experience, Cassandra, and even the comments that came from Keep Managing. So it sounds like this is not just one unique voice that we're hearing. It's like a theme that we hear growing up. And if we have to bring this word resilience into a one big picture, we all find that not like we grew up in different childhood neighborhoods, but we're hearing one constant theme. And underneath that theme is what we talk about, resilience. And this is where I'm going to shift gears to the next slide and kind of talk about what are we understanding? What are we trying to get out here from this word resilience, right? Like, what did strength sound like growing up, right? I want to begin with something that's familiar. So for many of us, maybe messages around strength didn't necessarily come out from a textbook, but it came from the people that we grew around with. People like our parents, grandparents, our teachers, even our older siblings, or perhaps the communities that we found ourselves in, either in our faith communities, our church or neighborhood, our schools. And sometimes they can simply come from just watching people live around us. So not necessarily hearing those words, but sometimes the people that live around us. So for me, for example, I grew up in Nigeria, and hard work is something that's highly valued, and we connect that with our success. So the more harder you work, the more successful you are. And if you work hard in school, there's the message that we hear that if you work hard, and we also had some songs that we used to kind of like sing, like if you work hard to school, that will create more opportunities for you down the line. So school was one factor that helped push that word resilience, right? Like, go to school, work hard, you're gonna become successful. Or perhaps you've worked hard in a family, and as you're working hard for that family, you're creating opportunities that weren't always guaranteed in that way. So there was a lot of pride for me growing up in being hardworking. And it's still, I'll say it's still something that I carry along. It's like we try to really work our way through, break through systems, right? So what's different for me now versus then is everyone was really working hard. And here I'm in a different environment where we're seeing different strengths and resilience showing up, and that can also influence how much hard work we're putting in there. So the point here is for us to understand resilience, it's something that comes from the strength, right? There's determination, we're feeling responsible, we're kind of persevering, and the bigger words, some people are being very ambitious. But sometimes these messages often begin as an encouragement, and sometimes they can quietly become a rule. So these, just like what people had mentioned, keep managing, keep going, be strong. We've always survived. You have to be twice as good. What you have done hasn't been done before. Like, there's just this words that we're hearing. So thinking about that, I would love to introduce you to a character in the story. So I'm taking you through a journey.
So a quick question. I'm not sure if you'll talk about this further into the webinar, but I am curious to know, as we talk about resilience and the definition, I find it's also useful to say maybe what it's not. And I'm curious what you would say is the difference between resilience and maybe toxic positivity.
So one thing that we know is with resilience is that it's something that we've always learned. It's a message that we've always learned versus we talking about positive toxicity. Resilience really is not like, we don't want to weight as a bad word. We want to pull out the strength in it. It's something that comes from a pressure. Like, there's sometimes a pressure or a message that comes behind that. Whereas the other word would come more from what we are seeing within our environment. But I think one thing that resilience is not is resilience, I would say, is a choice. Like, we choose to be able to push through, we choose to be able to keep going, versus the other one that's more intentional. And again, the environment plays a big role. So I'm just going to walk you through, let's present this young lady, and I would want to invite you to pay attention to whatever we are going through in this journey and apply it to the life of Grace. So I'm introducing you to Grace. Her name is Grace, and Grace is a 38-year-old woman that works in tech as a product manager who recently returned from her maternity leave and has 2 young children. So she's the oldest of the 4 siblings. And growing up, she had learned early that being the oldest means being responsible. So she helped care for her siblings and learned that she had to put her needs down aside. So now she's balancing motherhood, she's balancing a demanding career, and also trying to support her family back home. And Grace is now successful and independent, and dependable, but she's often that person that people turn to. But asking for help for herself doesn't come easy. But underneath that, all of that, we're seeing that Grace is tired. We're seeing that Grace is afraid of failing because she remembers the struggles she saw growing up. So when life gets difficult, her instinct now is keep going. I'm going to try. I have to figure it out. I'm going to be strong. And she's learning that she doesn't always have to be the strong one. So let's put Grace in mind. This is a mid-career lady that's going through a lot, and let's explore what's underneath that, like what's making her feel like she doesn't have to be the strong one. And this is where we're going to define resilience in the next slide. So for us to understand Grace's story, it's important for us to understand the word itself, right? Resilience is more than bouncing back, right? It's often described as the ability to adapt or kind of respond to hardship or adversity, stress, or any kind of significant challenges that we often find ourselves in. So I put on here that resilience can involve adapting to life changes when life changes, or we're persistent towards what matters, right? And we can also see resilience involving we recovering after difficulties. So it's like bouncing back to where we once were. And it allows us to understand that there is a form of flexibility that we give ourselves. It's almost like an elastic. When you're pulling an elastic, what happens when we stretch it so much? It retracts and bounces back. That's a very nice analogy I'd like to use. It's also a way that we use to connect with the sources of support. So this is giving us a hint that we're able to connect, we're able to recover, we're able to persist, we're able to adapt, and also finding meaning through difficult experiences. And this is where we talk about things like around distinguishing resilience from just simply surviving, right? Resilience is not the absence of struggle. And why I put that there is that sometimes our survivor instinct can say, how did I get here? How did I get through this? But resilience can kind of give us an idea and say, okay, how do I adapt and continue? It's not finite, it's a continuous process. right? And as we remember the statement that resilience is not the absence of struggle, what we are trying to do is to create a clear distinction on the importance that not everyone is incredibly good at surviving, right? Some people survive, some people are resilient. But what really distinguishes that is where we find ourselves bouncing back. And I think it's important to also unpack the what's underneath the word resilience, which I mentioned earlier, is the messages that we learn.
I wanted to comment on, your reminder here. I think it's quite right on. I think, I believe, not even think, I believe that we don't know we're actually resilient, or resilience doesn't actually activate until we go through struggle, right? Like if life is just blissful, everything is going well all the time, and, there's no hurdles, how do we really know we're resilient, right? It's that bounce back, as you're saying, that really helps in determining, okay, I have the will to keep going, I have the strength to keep going, I have all these tools and words that define resilience to keep going. So I appreciate that reminder, because I think that is the epitome of what resilience actually is when it is in its raw form.
Yes, thank you for adding that. And I would say that that is where our conversation actually begins, right? That reminder would be something that we can hold through and help us unpack, for example, in this case, the messages that we learn. So, like, what message did we learn about being strong? And I heard a few comments from earlier on, like keep going, keep managing, be strong, don't give up. We've always survived. Perhaps we might have heard unique messages based on our situation during our life struggles. But I want to be very careful here, because these messages that we're seeing, or these messages that are here, like don't give up, they're not inherently negative, right? I think for many people, especially immigrants or racialized communities, these messages can represent survival, right? It can also represent determination and even hope. So it has different meaning for different people. For example, keep going may have helped someone during a very tough, difficult period. Say, for example, they lost a child, or they lost a job, or perhaps you can work as twice as hard. That may have reflected a real understanding of some barriers that people might have faced where they're trying to get to the top. And that's something that they kept hearing, that just work is twice as hard, right? But the key question here is, what happens when these messages that we've heard starts to become an internal rule? So this starts to become a rule that has been engraved in us, where we are hearing, keep going, I don't have the permission to stop, because if I don't keep going, there's no permission to stop. Or perhaps we're hearing a lot of words like around, be strong. Be strong can then start to become, I can't let anyone see that I'm struggling. So think about Grace. Grace has taken a lot on her plate, but it's so hard for her to give out, but so easy. I mean, it's so hard for her to take in, but so easy for her to give out, right? And Grace has now been seen as the strong woman that's working, taking care of family and the child. So that's when something that has once supported our belief starts to make us create, like it starts to create the pressure. So what I put there, and I had an underline there, is the message may not be the problem. It's the rule that we create from it that might be. I don't know if anyone has anything to say. Cassandra, if you have any thoughts about this. I think this is something I would love to hear at least one or two people. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Our audience, please feel free to engage. Until then, I will insert myself, because, I think this slide alone defines the question I was asking earlier. on, what is the difference between resilience and toxic positivity. And I find, what you're saying here is toxic positivity is when we're not taking in the reality of it is hard, right? But instead we're telling ourselves like we have to do it regardless. We can't cry, you must bleed in order for it to be worth it, or all these things. Like it's motivational, but it can also gear towards maybe delusional a little bit. I'm using that word lightly, but sometimes again we have to acknowledge the struggle so that we know how to deal with it, and therefore that is where resilience is born, right? So I completely agree. I find it's often a fine line at that, from when it is about resilience and that strength versus when it's just, that toxic positivity because of the cultural images, or cultural messages that we received. And therefore, we feel like we have to present a certain way that life is great when life may not be great. The difference between adaptive and maladaptive when it comes to how we use our emotions is what is coming up for me with what can create the problem or the solution. Yeah, that was a mouthful. So please, someone comment.
Like how you brought us back from that previous question on toxic positivity and resilience. And yeah, that's the key message here. This is where we want to understand what sort of messages, either it be cultural, whatever meaning that we've drawn from that message, how has that been something that we've learned over time. I'm just going to check the chat box if there's anyone that had any thoughts on that, and if not, we would just keep going. Yeah. So now that we know that there is an internal rule that we've had or heard growing up, the messages that we've learned, how does that message now start to show up in the statements like keep going, the pressure to keep going? So this is where we want to kind of try to understand the difference when we notice when I can starts to become I have to. So I really did a highlight on those specific words, on this specific words, because they sound like a rule that we've had to endure over time. So let's return to Grace, all right? Grace started becoming exhausted, right? Her exhaustion isn't coming from just one thing. What we're seeing our exhaustion coming from is she has been carrying a lot of career expectation, working in tech, having to manage and juggle that with her motherhood responsibility, but also having to play a role of the older sibling that's helping people back home. That's financial. There's this financial expectation, and there's also this pressure that she's experiencing that she has to succeed. So we're seeing Grace experiencing a fear that she would eventually disappoint others. And these are messages that keep showing up in her life, where she has to constantly keep going and constantly showing that she has to prove herself. And what we're saying underneath all of these messages, I can handle it, I should be able to handle it, and I have to handle it. We're seeing how the subtle messages increases and creates this intense pressure as time go on. But underneath all this is the hardest part of this for her is she's now carrying a lot of burden that has accumulated over time. And she's carried this burden for so long that it starts to appear as normal. So this is where we want to understand, okay, when the I can has now turned to the I have to, like I have to handle it. So sometimes we think like this, like this is just what I have to do. And that's just what something we have to notice. But Grace genuinely can handle a lot with all that we're saying. And what we're saying is that the outside pattern and the behavior we're seeing is that it looks like Grace is strong. She's exuding the strength, but internally she's feeling exhausted. I don't know if anyone's resonating with this, because sometimes we live in a very busy world. If we face the reality, and we tend to hold in a lot. and we're not really quite aware of what we're noticing in our body. We're not quite aware of what we're noticing on how much accumulation that we've gathered over the years based on our life experiences. So what I'm trying to do is we're trying to focus on the internal part. What roles have we acclaimed ourselves to over time, and how is that now showing up when we are engaging with people, for example, or how is that showing up in our body, right? So I think I'd like to move to the next step, because now we understand what's happening in our minds, how we've learned these messages over time, and how those messages have turned into an internal rule and starts to create this pressure where we have to keep going. I think this is where I'm going to shift gears, but Cassandra, if you have anything to add here, I think it's been nice to hear.
There's so much thoughts that are circulating in my head, whether it's from present day or past, and just considering, the level of quietness with our audience members. I also want to give space, that these are big questions. So if it feels like, too much is going on, definitely honor that. And I do want to give space to that because Taiwo is able to support you as well. She is accepting clients. So for those that are looking to deepen this conversation, have support with answering these questions and being guided to ultimately your identity, right? Like, how do you navigate this world and using the adaptive resilience that we all have the ability to activate? Please feel free to reach out to One Piece Therapy so you can get connected with Taiwo and continue the conversation. So I just want to give space for that.
Yeah, thank you, Cassandra. And yes, I think that's a very nice way for us to continue this conversation, because it doesn't end here. That's the reality. This is something that we often internalize and we often carry, and I'll be very glad to connect with you on that. So I was trying to point out how we've talked about the messages that we've learned and the pressure that the rules that we've now put in ourselves to live by. But one thing that we oftentimes find ourselves doing is not noticing what our body is telling us, right? And our body is an important piece of information that provides us some signals of when things are either happening good or bad. It's not a final verdict. So in our body, we have the mental part. So let's put Grace in this example. What we're saying mentally is we can start having either racing thoughts. We're experiencing constant problem solving, trying to figure out how to help, how to thrive, how to survive. And then we now start noticing that we're having difficulty switching off. So a lot of things and thoughts are going through your mind. And oftentimes I hear some people say, it's really hard for me to to turn off my thoughts, or they're experiencing a lot of self-criticism, where we talk about the inner critic. And I'm going to touch on that in a moment. But if we were to bring this awareness back to ourselves, we want to notice how this is also showing up emotionally. Are we becoming anxious? Or are we noticing that we are feeling overstimulated, or experiencing feeling like we're exhausted or disconnected from others, or even feeling numb, right? These things are signs that can start to tell us that, there's something going on within us, but also how can we start paying attention to that? And then physically, what we're seeing is muscle tension. You'd be surprised to see how much a lot of what we are going through, the stress and resonance we're going through, actually shows up physically. We're noticing that our sleep is no longer good. We're sleeping poorly. We're feeling exhausted even when we slept through the night. We're having constant headaches, or we're just kind of like experiencing this fatigue, right? So we're not trying to diagnose ourselves based on these body sensations, these things that we're feeling, we're only just trying to simply become more aware. So whatever wherever you are, you can notice your shoulders, you can notice your jaw, notice your hands, even noticing your chest, how you're breathing. You don't need to fix anything. The point here is just for us to start noticing, because sometimes this awareness gives us more information when we have a lot of busy things to do. So one thing I really want to really, if you can take out of today's journey, is what is your body telling you? What am I carrying that other people may not see? Because it's you that know your body. And what am I noticing right now? So that's one piece. I would say that's a key message I want to share is, what's your body telling you? These messages that we've learned, this pressure to keep going, this internal rule that we're living by, how is this showing up in my body? And this is where I'd love to take a pause, and I'll put in the chat session, and this you can put down when you get a chance. I want you to complete this statement. I tend to push through when, so you can complete that statement. When I'm motivated, when I'm sad, when I'm stressed, what does that look like for you? So I'd appreciate if you can just complete that statement, and I'll come back to that statement as I'm moving on.
How everyone is, reflecting, and just acknowledge what these questions you're asking immediately do is cause you to slow down. And that's exactly what is needed in order to pay attention to your mind, to your emotions, to your body at large, is slow down. So when we're thinking in that I have to, as you shared, then we're just going. We're leaning towards maybe more toxic positivity than resilience, right? And therefore, we're going to lead to burnout, survival mode, trauma, things it just escalate, anxiety, things you've mentioned already, Taiwo. And I love this question and how it, again, naturally just embodies what we're supposed to do in the first place, is slow down and pay attention to these cues.
Chipping that, I think slowing down has been one word I've used in this season of my life too, and I think it's been very helpful. It brings me back to an awareness and keeps me grounded for the most part. I assess what's happening around, and I'm figuring out, okay, where is my energy being channeled to, and what can I start doing to slow down? Thanks for sharing that thought. So as I mentioned previously, the inner critic and our self-worth tends to come up to the surface level when we talk or think about how we can start to redefine our strength. So the inner critic, if we have to explore that word on its own, it can be easy to overlook because it sounds like motivation. Maybe we may think that we're simply trying to do better. But when we're constantly comparing ourselves, either focusing on our mistakes or feeling that we are, that we should always be doing more, what we start to see is that it can start to affect how we see ourselves. So we're constantly criticizing, we're constantly engaging in self-criticism every day, comparing ourselves. Perhaps we are living in an environment where everyone's thriving and things are not working for you, and we're just constantly re-evaluating ourselves. For example, the grace of Grace. So success for Grace might have felt like a reassurance that she's doing enough, right? While the mistakes that she might be showing at work, the mistakes that she might be experiencing at work, can start to make her feel like she's questioning herself. And this is where we want to take a pause to reflect on how this can start to show up as a repeated self criticism, and how it's starting to affect and influence our sense of self-worth. So I think one thing is one thing I'm noting here is that, comparing ourselves, this is how inner critic can start to show up. But one thing that we have to start looking at is how can we start reconnecting ourselves in a way that we begin to separate what we do from who we are, right? And when we talk about what we do from who you are, I think that's something that we need to take a step back and say, my worth doesn't necessarily have to change with it. So now we have to start thinking of capacity. And I see that Cassandra has thrown in a thought for people to think about, like, what are your thoughts, everyone? Like, what are your thoughts on this inner critic and self-worth? And how would you fill in the blank? So the previous blank, I tend to push through. So keep in mind this idea of how inner critic can show up, but what are you doing in the moment? How are you pushing through in the moment? What's keeping you thriving? Is it the achievement, or what is something that has made you feel like you are finding yourself reevaluating yourself, like your self-worth? And the goal here is we're trying to notice the connection. How is this connecting to, how is the self-worth connecting to how well I'm doing, my performance in that sense?
So we're attempting to engage. Okay, we have someone that mentioned when there's external pressure to perform. Yes, so you tend to push through when there's external pressure to perform. Yes, and sometimes, oh, maybe you can comment on that directly, Taiwo, before. Yeah.
And I resonate with this too as well. What are the external pressures to perform? Perhaps there are expectations that we have from either our family or expectations from work, right? And what we can see here is, like, we are trying to value our achievement without making the achievement look like it's a measure of our worth, right? So I love, thank you, X, for putting that in. I tend to push through when there was external pressure to perform. And I'll be quite curious to know, what was your response to that? Like, how did you push through with this pressure to perform? I mean, it's a very nice statement that you've put there, but I'll be very curious to learn more about what kind of pressures were you experiencing. And you don't have to share any little, like, a minute detail, just kind of like a vague statement, because this is where we go back to that idea of the messages that we've learned. Some of those messages do not have to come as a voice, or do not have to come as a word or statement. They also show up in the environment that we're living in, right? Again, I shared my experience as an immigrant, as a Nigerian. No one has to tell me that I have to work hard. Everyone around me were all hardworking. That's actually wrote off on me, in the sense that I knew that hard work equates success, because for those that we've seen working hard, we saw the trajectory of their life moving up, not down. But then again, some people did not have the capacity. And I think that's where I would touch on later, is what capacity do we have to hold for us to push through these pressures, right? Thank you, X, for adding that. I think, Cassandra, you can add your thoughts through as well if you have.
One of our attendees nicely, brought in that vulnerability is again just honoring that if you decide to not respond, we're going to take it as you are listening still. So, we're not offended by any means. We do know it is hard to share your thoughts and feelings and your inner world, especially with people you don't know, as this is not group therapy either. It is in fact a webinar. But again, it is also a safe space if you do feel like you want to put thoughts out there. So thank you for our attendee that did. That question, what came to my mind was, how we more want to have failures than be a failure, right? Like, I rather just say I'm doing and trying than to just sit and do nothing, because that could feel worse from the external perception. of your life, right? And that in itself, right? Trying to run away from being a failure, trying to run away from shame or embarrassment because of that external pressure is enough to keep going. Of course, that takes you away from yourself. Sometimes I do want to acknowledge that, focusing on others solely or being motivated by pressure by others solely can take you away from you knowing your inner world. But there's definitely a momentum that can start from that position. And they also included that external expectations from work, people pushing things to us and feeling bad for not living up to those expectations. Guilt. I'm curious for you to talk about guilt, Taiwo.
Guilt is a big word. And I think it can stem from different meanings or different experiences that we've heard growing up. Perhaps the guilt of not being the true self that you wanted to be. I think guilt, like oftentimes when I try to explore guilt, I try to understand what brought you to this point, like what brought you to the point where we are feeling guilty, or there's this thing around self-blame, whereas, right? Because I feel like when we explore those little pieces, there we have to kind of give ourselves that pie chart to create a responsibility pie of like, where was this guilt stemming from? Are you 100% responsible for feeling this way, right? And this can show up in our inner critic, right? It can also show up in our self-worth. What was that one thing that we once wish we had that we didn't have? Or what are we guilty about? Is it feeling guilty about missed opportunities? And I think the bigger question is, how am I pushing through this whole situation? Thank you, Sheng, for expanding your stuff in that sense. Yeah, thank you, Cassandra. So I want to move on to self-compassion, and we're going to be winding down soon. I'm just kind of like hitting the top spot at this point. Thank you, Sheng. Self-compassion is a word that we often hear. It's quite common, but now we're drawing ourselves back to how self-compassion can sometimes sound nicer to ourselves, but it's not. Like self-compassion sounds like we're letting ourselves off the hook, or it doesn't mean that we're avoiding responsibility. That's why I put this picture there, because self-compassion has the streams where we can see how it's expands into mindfulness, compassion, self-kindness. But self-compassion is not any of those four things that are listed here. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's not avoiding responsibility. Self-compassion is not lowering your standards. And it's not feeling sorry for yourself. It's really more than that, I would say. If we had to put Grace back into this picture, if Grace makes a mistake, she can acknowledge it. We all make mistakes. No one's perfect. The difference is that she doesn't have to punish herself for making that mistake in that process. And a key person in this self-compassion work, her name is Dr. Kristen Nerf. Her research has described self-compassion in 3 different streams, which is what is being shown on this slide. It's divided into mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. And that's why we want to turn it into something more practical. So remember, our struggles do not make us appear defective. There's nothing wrong with us. We are moving through life. There's some little piece of self-acceptance that we have to acknowledge that is within our control. So what we're trying to do with self-compassion is for us to be able to give the grace that we give to others and return that back to ourselves. We have to be able to respond to that to ourselves with care. We have to be able to hold ourselves accountable without attacking ourselves. This is why we briefly talked about the inner critic, because that is what really shows up underneath, and it doesn't give us the grace to share what we give to others. So the question here is, what would Grace say to Grace? And I'm just going to go very simple on this side. Let's bring our attention back to Grace. Her inner critic is saying, you should have known better. right? And for her, she's like, I should be able to handle this. But the self-compassion part doesn't tell her that the mistake doesn't matter. So it's saying that for her, Grace can start to say, okay, I know, I'm going to take a pause and relax. This is a lot, right? Asking for support doesn't make me incapable. So now Grace is giving herself the ability to give that same grace that she gives others. She's now welcoming it that back to herself. She's learning something new for herself. Another thing that the way we can also reframe this as well is if we're finding ourselves either feeling guilty or blaming or having this inner critic voice so intense in our mind, we're saying to ourselves, I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough. What we can ask ourselves is, what is enough for today? So we're trying to find what we have capacity for. We're trying to respond in a way that gives us the grace to say, if I were in my friend's shoe, this is what I would say. So whatever you say to a best friend, say it back to yourself. And that's the kind of grace that we're hoping to hear from. So using self-compassion here is, the idea is that it gives us the ability to change how we're having this conversation with ourselves. So I'm briefly going to walk you guys through 4 practical skills or 4 practical tools that we can start to use immediately. Number 1 that I've put here is notice the role. So noticing the role, think about what we talked about earlier, the messages that we've learned over time that has become an internalized role. So for us to undo that, or for us to work on that, we want to start noticing. And this is where we can start to notice certain statements that we're making to ourselves, which I call the should statements. So oftentimes we hear ourselves, I should have done better. I should have been further ahead. I should help. I should be able to handle this. We need to take a pause, first of all, and ask ourselves, and probably say, hold on, Taiwo, what did I learn from this actually? Am I being realistic? Or is this still mine? Perhaps like Taiwo is really stressed and she's going through a lot and having this high expectation and holding this inner critic. Taiwo has to now start being more real with herself. Is this enough? Right? So these are questions that we can reflect on. And for us to reframe, or for us to start saying that, now that we've noticed the role, we can start to say, okay, I choose to be the woman I want. I can handle this every day, but this is what I'm able to do. So we can start changing the statement from the should statement, which is I should be able to handle this, to I need to, or you could say it matters to me too, or I don't have to. Sometimes we have to come clear and assertive with how we want. But one thing that we're doing here in noticing the role is that we are now giving ourselves the ability to create more room to choose rather than automatically obeying that rule that we've always had. So now we have the word of choice. Choice now becomes something that we're accessible to. If you guys resonate with that, I think that's something that I want to start constantly practicing, and that's something that we can start to do. Thank you. Practical tool number 2, we want to come back to ourselves. Now let's do a check-in with ourselves. This could look like a body check for yourself, but also trying to listen to your body. What is our body saying to us, and how can we start responding? Again, we're doing this by noticing what our body is telling us physically. Am I feeling exhausted? Where is this exhaustion coming from? Let's name it. What might this be telling me? So could this be telling me that, how do I respond to that? Knowing that I'm exhausted right now, I'm feeling tired, I need another coffee. We can start asking ourselves, what might this be telling me, right? And then we can start exploring the needs. So what do I need right now? I am exhausted. That's what I've labeled that at. And because I'm exhausted, I've taken a lot of coffee to keep me going. But what do I need right now? The answer to that question might be as simple as I need to rest. I need to give myself the grace to rest. I don't have to do this today. I'm going to push it off to tomorrow. And the response doesn't have to be something dramatic. It could just be as a realistic one as, what's one realistic thing I can do right now? Again, back to that idea of I'm just going to rest. So being exhausted, resting, giving ourselves that grace. Okay. And as we wrap up, I have this next two ones. We want to make a room for us to rest and receive. So I just mentioned that recently. But when we find ourselves pushing through and experiencing all this pressure and exhaustion, we need to understand what rest looks like. So I'll just read this real quick. Rest can look like say no without over explaining. So this is where we want to become more assertive. Don't feel bad for yourself. Don't feel guilty. Don't self blame. It's just you saying no when you know you can't. So think about your capacity. Or perhaps you can explore delegating a task or asking your partner or friend to take off something from your plate. Or it can also look like you taking a break from, for example, if you cook a lot, you're cooking a lot and for the whole family. And I know how ethnic foods can take a lot of time. And if we're finding ourselves exhausted, we want to rest by taking that break. And we can also explore choosing sleep over one more thing. So we find ourselves in this deep sometimes is, I need to get this done by today, but sometimes we have to rest. And the last one here is you want to protect what really restores you, right? We can give from an empty vessel. We want to be able to protect what restores us. Receiving is something that we often don't find ourselves doing, right? And this is why we talk about how we give ourselves others the grace, but don't give ourselves. And this can look like accepting help, being vulnerable enough to say, I'm tired, I don't have the capacity, I need help. Or perhaps we can say, I'm going to let someone else take the lead while I do this task. So that is delegating a task to someone, or asking for support even before reaching that limit. So we don't want to wait till we've become so burned out or we're becoming so irritable, reaching out to someone that we can confide in to helping us. And then receiving care without needing to give back immediately. I don't know if this is a kind of mentality where because you helped me, I'm going to have to help you and I owe you and all those kind of things. Sometimes we have to give ourselves that grace that we're reaching out. So that's practical tool number 3, resting and receiving.
Appreciate in the rest column that you mentioned taking a real break, because immediately, another cultural message kicked in of taking a break, laying down, taking it slow can mean that you're lazy, right? So here's another debunk of it's actually rest, and we do need it in the process of recovery, in the process of growth, in the process of success. Rest is important. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you. I really love that you highlighted that. We often would hear that word, you're lazy, just get to go. The next I'd say the next practical tool here is, and I think this is one of the key tools as well, is let's start looking at how we can redefine our strength by protecting what really matters. So this can be a nice reflection for everyone to take away with is, what can I start doing, or how can I start being more intentional about where my energy is going to? So this isn't about telling someone to stop caring about their family or community or those that they find important. Instead, we're asking ourselves questions like, what am I giving my energy to? Is it work? Is it family? Or what is taking more time more than it gives? So we're trying to find a balance in where energy is going to and where it's been channeled to. Another question could look like, what do I want my energy to serve? I really love that, because sometimes we're serving multiple things. We're doing multiple things at the same time. Maybe it's family. Family is important. Maybe our faith is important. Maybe our parenting or our career, or even just the community that is important. The bigger question here and what we're hoping for is, how can we connect back to our values, right? How can I live my values in a way that it's actually sustainable, right? So it's different from just simply doing everything that everyone expects. The goal here is that we're trying to care without abandoning ourselves. So abandoning yourself is the values that makes you who you are. So we want to protect our values. That's the key here. That's what matters. If that's what matters, that's what we're protecting. Okay. Yeah, and this is the key of today's journey is now that we've learned how and things that we've understood, the underneath layer of the messages and the pressure and the inner critic, how can we redefine our strength, right? This is the heart of today's webinar, and I think we're not trying to throw away the strength that we know. What we're trying to do, we're trying to expand our definition of the strength, right? So looking back at Grace's story, Grace can still be ambitious. She can still be responsible. She can still take care of her family, but the strength can now include her supports. It can now include her taking some rest, creating some boundaries, being vulnerable, being open to receiving, and then healing. And that's why I said strength can hold more than one thing. So we can oftentimes find ourselves being strong and at the same time needing support. This is how we can start to redefine our strength. We can say, okay, I know I'm ambitious, I want to be this, but I also need to rest. We can also say that I can care for others, but also others can care, and others can care about me, or I can care for myself. So we're creating a balance here. We're trying to say that even though I make mistakes, I can make mistakes, I can still be worthy. So we redefining our strength here comes from we understanding how we can start to balance and allow ourselves invite more opportunities for us to give ourselves that grace and more ways to be strong. It's a balance. We know that strength comes from different messages, but how can we start balancing it? And that's the key message here. I'm inviting everyone here to reflect on this key message, which is we can also have strength, but also require rest or ask for support. So we're trying to balance that ultimately in the end. Okay. I'll be very brief here, returning back to Grace. So Grace is now asking different questions for herself. She's now saying that, instead of how much more can I handle this, Grace is now asking, what do I need? All right. Instead of how much more can I accomplish, Grace is now asking what is enough. She's also asking herself previously, saying, how do I prove myself, right? How do I prove myself? She's now exploring what really matters to me. So thinking about the values. And then she's been previously thinking about it as, how do I keep going? Because this is a message I've learned so far, and this is what has carried me through. Now she's asking herself and reframing it to say, how do I want to live? So there's some present moment awareness that we're engaging here with Grace, but also having her not live by the rules that she's grown up with. So that's I think that's a key message for Grace in this place. We've turned that keep going into a redefined strength that allows her to welcome and notice what's going on around her. Okay. Yeah. And this is where we want to pause and say to ourselves, now that I'm able to start accepting rest or receiving that grace, how can I do this? The key here is that you don't have to change everything. You just want to choose one, right? It starts with one small step. So first we can notice what's happening. One should keep, if you're finding that the should statements keep going, notice that, pause and think about what is automatically making you push through, right? And then give ourselves that grace to rest. So before we get completely depleted, before we get to that point of feeling so exhausted, we need to give ourselves that grace to rest. And asking, this can be a tough thing for people to do, but a simple ask for help can open up a conversation. It can open up a well of conversation with someone that you trust. And that helps you to reduce the ability for you to get to the point of exhaustion. You're now asking before you get to that limit. I love this. Another way we can do is rewrite the rule that we've lived by. And when we're able to rewrite that rule that we've believed by, the should, and say, I have the capacity or I can do this, that rule can start to serve us back. So whatever messages that we've learned, whatever rules that we've internalized over the years, we can rewrite that story. So it's all in our hand to rewrite that. And finally, one action that reflects what matters to you is that you have the ability to choose. Choice is available to you. It's all starts with one small step. So that's the key here. You don't have to change everything, but it all starts with one small step. All right. We're approaching the end, and thank you all for sitting through till this time. And I think this is where I want to just do a brief recap of all that we've talked about, and I really appreciate your engagement as well, and just having to walk you through this journey of grace and redefining resilience. But what I want to leave you up with as we wrap up is this few key takeaways. If there's one thing that you can take away from today, I think it's that resilience doesn't always mean that we have to keep enduring. We have to keep enduring. It doesn't mean that we have to abandon the strength that we already have that has brought us to this point. It means that we can expand it, right? So strength doesn't mean that we're carrying everything, and your worth is way bigger than what you can accomplish, right? And just taking on those practical tools that we've shared, knowing that self-compassion is something that we can hold on to, it allows us to take that responsibility without asking or attacking ourselves. So if you guys have learned one or two things, I think that one thing is that, you have the capacity to do it. It just requires you to explore how you've lived through the messages and how that can change through giving yourself that grace that you give to others back to yourself. Okay. And yeah, thank you, Cassandra. As we wrap up, I'm hoping to leave this reflection back with you guys. Is how can we start honoring the strength that has brought us to this point? And maybe you can reflect on, on this. What would giving yourself more grace look like this week? Perhaps think about the struggles that you've experienced this week and what can you start doing using those practical tools that we've shared earlier today. For me, I would say redefining strength means that I'm able to accept help when I need it. I'm able to reach out when I need it. So I would encourage you guys to take on this reflection for yourself. What would giving yourself more grace look like this week? I don't know if you have anything to add, Cassandra, but I think this is where I really want to thank everyone for this wonderful conversation. If this has resonated with you, or you found that you're recognizing some of the patterns that we've shared in your own life, this is where we invite you to explore a further conversation in therapy, where we can have that space to, explore deeper the conversation that we've just started, or just even general life struggles or life transition. So I would encourage that you access our websites on www.onepacetherapy.ca, or you can call the contact on the screen. Or if you feel like you want to have a personal conversation, I would be happy to connect with you, and you can book a meet and greet or a session with me for us to go deeper. But thank you everyone for spending your time, your lunch with me at this time and staying till the end.
Amazing. Thank you, Taiwo, for such a thorough and well-rounded presentation. I'm sure everyone has a lot of food for thought. If it's not the tools, it's the questions, it's the terminology, it's the perspective of life. There's so many angles to take away from this presentation. And as you nicely wrapped up, please feel free to reach out to us at One Piece Therapy to connect with Taiwo and start your wellness journey. And also, since there also was a lot in this presentation, we will be putting this on our YouTube channel. So you can follow us on social media to be up to date with your wellness. You can revisit this as much times as you need to until maybe you're ready to now get more in depth with these questions. Again, as Taiwo has shared, thank you abundantly for being here, and we will see you during our next webinar. Take good care, everyone. Have a beautiful day and week.